Well done, Blizzard, your new support spec has absolutely broken World of Warcraft. I'm not being sarcastic, I genuinely mean well done, because this week may end up changing World of Warcraft forever, and maybe they've done that intentionally. Also, there's a crazy amount of stuff going around, a lot of it's misleading, so today we're really going to get to the bottom of what's actually going on. That was Biceps Pump, the longtime Death Knight guide writer, assembling the most busted team of bastards he could. 2 unholy DKs, 2 shadow priests to give them power infusion, an arcane mage for int, warrior tank for battle shout, demon hunter for chaos brand, and a monk healer for mystic touch. Plus 22 augmentation evokers. And that raid now holds most of the top rankings on heroic for DPS and for speed. I think you can tell why, because it turns out that stacking these guys results in absolutely off-the-wall cracked damage, especially when paired with Unholy Death Knights, who are very well known for having the most insanely scaling burst window in the game. I should know, I have PI, and it goes on one person because of that. Now, how the hell is any of this happening? There's a few things. One, Blizzard kinda dropped the ball. Stacking a ton of main stat through one of their core mechanics, Ebb and Might, is going to have fairly flat scaling, even in a decently full group. But they also give you a bit of versatility, and a bit of crit, and a flat damage echo, and another 15% on top. Which does mean that yes, Blizzard accidentally let augvokers scale exponentially. Here's the fun thing. The insane broken maths doesn't actually kick in with 2 or 3 augmentation evokers, but once you get up to, say, 22, it goes off the rails. There's a massive amount of multiplying power that is being stacked onto only a few characters, and Blizzard knowingly dropped the spec into the game with 0 protection against this. But even then, that shouldn't be causing 20-second kills. Most of the issue for it getting out of control is Breath of Aeons and Fate Mirror. Breath of Aeons adds a debuff that gathers 15% of all damage dealt to the target, and then it explodes. Then Fate Mirror gives all damage from the Prescience buffed targets. Prescience is a buff that will have been on both these DKs. So all the damage that they do, right? 15% of that will be done again. So augvoker number 22's breath will echo the damage from 21's breath, which echoed the damage from number 20's, and all the way down. And each one is also echoing these scaled up DKs with absolutely insane stats. Here's a visual example of some napkin maths. The point is that this crazy scaling happens when you have 5 different multipliers happening at once. So yeah, you can see that it looks pretty okay when it's just a few evokers. In our rough example here, a Death Coil would do just about triple its usual damage during a full burst window with 5 whole augvokers. That's not exactly a great sell, right? I mean, yeah, your Death Coil did a lot of damage, but if you just took 5 stronger classes in terms of raw DPS than the augvoker, you'd probably be winning. But obviously the point is that it gets out of control. Because with 22, it would be doing over 25 times the damage. Every additional evoker adds more damage and more scaling than the last. The last time something like this happened was actually Warlords of Draenor with the Savage Hallows. 3 legendary rings, right? Nimrathris, Malus, and Thorasus, I think. Each person, right, who had the ring would get a gigantic buff, and then they would explode for a percentage of the damage they dealt during that buff window. Now, arcane mages could do a filthy amount of damage in a short window by stacking their own buffs like Prismatic Crystal, so stuff like this happened. Sub 30-second kills of bosses, which is something we're only really seeing again now. Now, you might also think about, say, corruptions and how Nyalotha speed kills were actually happening too. And those were kind of end of expansion fun bollocks, right? Absolute mad loony shit that was all just kind of hilarious. So that scaling is why large numbers of them are literally broken in raid. But if you look over at Mythic Plus, yeah, they're not being stacked. However, they are ridiculously strong when you bring just one. This is the state of the group finder. Everyone wants an augvoker, and it's very easy to see why. Looking at sub-creation, they've instantly dropped into S tier. And remember, sub-creation is not based on some dude's opinion. It is purely based on data. It ranks from logs, so these are real-world results. And again, it makes sense why. The damage is great when they're paired with a strong spec, and they buff the hell out of the tank survivability, and they help the healer do some pump too. So when you think about a support spec, yeah, you expect to lose some damage, but not with how this spec has shipped. It's also hard to overstate how much they can live through. Armor buffs, strong off heals, a cheat death, a max HP buff, and a talent that turns their own defensive into rallying cry with half the cooldown. They are just fundamentally extremely strong at their role, buffing shit. Especially in a meta where Guardian Druids are doing crazy damage, and the recently revamped and now giga overpowered Holy Paladins and Fire Mage is absolutely popping off. They're now part of this kind of like perfect all-star comp. 2 buff classes to juice up that Fire Mage, and then the busted tank and the busted healer. Everyone's busted! It's probably some really shitty early 2000s joke that John can do in the edit. Anyway, people are genuinely doing keys a whole 2 levels higher just because of all of this augmentation. No crazy maths here, they're just strong. Like finishing a plus 26 dungeon at item level 426 levels of overtuned. But what about the truth? Well, it's not all big numbers and happy lizards. You may have seen this image going around, with people being bullied out of groups for doing less damage than the tank. Now, there's a reason for that. Blizzard updated their combat logging so it shows, when someone does damage, how much of that came from the Evoker's buffs. But the thing is, it only shows in the advanced combat logs. These are pumped out, they're actually written to a file on your computer, and they are used by Warcraft logs. Those extra lines are actually not on the in-game API, which is where details and other add-ons get their information from. So it basically looks like buffed players are just really strong and the augvokers are asleep, even when up to half that damage is because of the augvoker's buffs. It's essentially just people not knowing what's going on because they spent their whole life knowing that the damage meter's number is law. It's going to take a long time to solve that, maybe a very long time, because it also involves people unlearning old habits, and in a way you could say that's exciting. Sub-creation and people begging for them is probably going to fix the problem for the augvokers. People will soon learn because everyone seems to want one of them even though they do less damage, and there's probably a reason why. It's just a funny situation, because people think they're bad, but actually they're the complete opposite of that. And then there's what's happening in raids, where in raid, they aren't actually very good. Yeah, turns out it's a bit of an all or nothing situation. Here's a funny shot of Warcraft logs that's been going around. That is max percentile, right? On one boss. That means it's only really looking at how the, well, insane GigaChads raid. Here's what it actually looks like across people who have played the game this week. You see that Augmentation is actually underperforming quite badly, instantly taking the worst DPS spot in the game. And it's basically as simple as that. Great M+, literally broken when you have enough of them in a raid, but with only one or a few per raid, they actually do quite poorly. But there is a caveat here though. And this caveat is present when you look at logs. When a class does damage, the logs show the Augmentation Evoker's split. Unless it's pet damage. That's why the Unholy DK logs look so ridiculous. And that's because the vast majority of their damage is actually from their pets. It's not being given to the Evokers. Because by the way, if you're a priest and you've not worked out why you've been asked to PI all of the Unholy DKs, it's because of their gargoyle, right? So it's like, if those things don't work, we're screwed. So accounting for that, they may perhaps only be like second or third worst right now. Okay, the state of things. To recap, if you stack them, they break the game. If you take one into M+, they only kind of break the game. If you take one into a raid, you're trolling. Great, so what's going to happen next? Well, Blizzard should nerf and buff them, which is a weird thing to say. First things first, the raid stacking problem needs to be fixed as soon as possible. before 10.2. And if we can figure out the issue by doing some napkin math, I'm fairly sure the devs are literally talking about the fix right now as I record this video and probably as you watch it. The cleanest way is to probably make sure Fate Mirror and Breath of Aeons have some sort of hard limit on how many other evokers they can combine with. And that's because, as you can see here, the damage scaling without those is actually a lot more reasonable. As for M+, a few targeted nerfs should make them reasonable because it's really just a matter of how crazy damage they're able to, to buff up, while also bringing that incredible utility. I think we all agree that there should probably be some sort of trade-off there. As for Raid, they already have a buff that translates their Raid power into small group power, so they could probably buff their Raid power and nerf their group power very easily, and their Mythic Plus utility is less valuable there in the Raid setting. So on paper, there's a reasonably easy fix, and nerfs are likely to come in fairly soon. But let's be real, this has cracked open a can of worms, and they're squiggling and squirming around everywhere. The very nature of this spec is kind of a dangerous thing to introduce because their damage depends on other damage being balanced. So with Unholy DKs and Mages having great burst windows, literally, with those two things, the future of WoW's balance is in peril, in a way. For every time a class is 5% too strong, adding an Augmentation Evoker will exacerbate the size of that, of that level of overpoweredness that a spec has in any given point of time. And that then makes the augvoker itself kind of too strong in the process. It's as simple as this. Balancing a DPS that relies on other DPS just makes the whole thing more complicated. So, it's on Blizzard to make sure that balance is, well, better handled than it ever has been before. Thing is, though, they actually knew this going in. Graham Berger, who led Evoker, or Augmentation Evoker, has given a number of interviews about this spec, and he's talked about the challenges and the problems they've ran into, and the problems they know they're going to face, and their overall ideas. This is supposed to be an altruistic spec that helps others for people who gravitate towards tank or healer, but maybe just don't want the added responsibility of those roles. I think that's great as a goal. Now, they're smart enough to know what the issue is. You can have a support that does the same as or more damage than a DPS, because then it's literally just better. It's like how a disciplined priest can't be doing competitive damage with a DPS because then suddenly it's both a DPS and a healer, and it's busted overpowered. But the thing is, if the augvoker does less damage, then people will find it hard to bring. They've talked about this before. It's Ian's idea of the Game 1, right? Game 1 being the version of WoW that isn't for the parsers and the Warcraft logs people, but, the version that Blizzard actually designs for people to have fun with. And then Game 2 is the version that us players have made up ourselves, where it's all about speed kills and the best parses and all the goopy gamer brain things. Now, this clearly feels like a move towards at least being okay focusing in Game 1, because it's not perfectly balanced, the augvoker, but it is at least fun and it does make players happy. And that's why I think that there is a chance that they might be this obscenely strong on purpose, maybe to get people to play with it and talk. Okay, I don't think that the crazy stacking is on purpose, not at all, but I say that their relative strength in the Mythic Plus setting is probably meant to get people talking. Now, while there are definitely a lot of Mythic Raiders and high-end players complaining here, and rightly so, because this kind of does mean that they just have to give a spot to an augvoker in whatever they do, there is also an absolute ton of positive feedback on how augmentation feels. Both of these things are important, and balance should be the easy part. It perfectly fits into their new approach with content overall, and that is just move fast, break things, ship. For a long time, what did they not do? Ship content. What are they doing now? Shipping content. Is it a little bit ropey sometimes? Yes. Is it overall a more healthy position than we were in 2 years ago? Immeasurably. It's better for players to sometimes have something that's a little bit ropey, but still is exciting and fun, than a game that is working perfectly, but gets absolutely no content. I think the good news is that Dragonflight, until now, was mostly in a great spot with that balance there. I mean, actual game balance has broadly been pretty damn good in this expansion. They've been amazingly fast at actually, responding to class feedback and that kind of thing. This has just thrown us for a bit of a wobbly. And I think that's why they've put it into patch 10.1.5. They know that this needs maybe 20 weeks, 18 weeks, just out in the wild, before the next season happens, because that's the time where they have all the live data in the mid-season. They have months to tweak before 10.2 comes, because 10.2 is when this is truly going to matter. It also opens the door to future support specs. Ian himself said that if this gets a positive reception, which I think it already has, that they will consider what else they can add. Bards, Tinkers, perhaps even other specs to existing classes. It's all starting to look a lot more possible with how players are talking about augmentation this week. Even if a bit of that is doomsaying over Blizzard making their balanced team's job way, way harder. But then again, if instead of a single outlier, this becomes a pillar of gameplay, maybe we can see more things be designed around the notion of there being a support, and therefore supports being a little bit less crazy for the game. At the end of the day, this is literally a new role being added into an 18 or 19-year-old game. Does stand to reason that that new role will make things be a bit shaky for a bit. So this will be a key few weeks for World of Warcraft. Either the game is broken and Blizzard has to walk back the augvoker, which would be a bit embarrassing to announce for the next expansion, or they can try to bring this home with some quick fixes and land an absolute major win, which is a support spec finally in WoW, which would be quite a thing, and I think would get people talking. There you have it. Augvoker, that's what's going on. Let me know what your thoughts and experiences have been with this one. I've actually not tried it out yet. I've rolled over to my Paladin, and I'm just having a lot of fun with the Paladin revamp, frankly. It's great. Can't wait to, tank the new Mega Dungeon at some point. So, all good stuff. I want to know what you think. I'll see you next time.